a way that moves us away from projects, another project. A project has a beginning and an end, as we all know, but is more built into our way of living and our way of working into the future, 20, 30, 40 years time frame, rather than 2 or 3 year projects. That has to be the key. So with that in mind, we're going to see a short film, and then we'll introduce the panelists and get on with the discussion. So over to you, I think, Sarah, to launch the film. Thank you.
Climate change is hitting the poorest communities hardest. Local action demands systemic change and sustained finance. The local climate adaptive living facility, hosted by UNCDF, bridges this finance gap. LoCAL is a flexible mechanism that drives finance to the local government level, empowering communities for locally led climate adaptation. Launched in Cambodia and Bhutan in 2011, LoCAL is now a global mechanism. A growing number of countries have joined as LoCAL partners. Others are consolidating their country mechanisms, launching them, or designing initiatives. LoCAL works because it is a mechanism that is embedded in country systems, can be adapted to meet local needs, but with standardized quality assurance and monitoring. To date, LoCAL has mobilized $125 million and counting, working with subnational government in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean and Pacific for locally led climate adaptation. LoCAL is owned by the countries that sign up to the mechanism. The LoCAL board is made up of representatives from participating countries that are among the world's most vulnerable to climate change. Our local ambassadors know that LoCAL works.
Moçambique é testemunho de que este é mecanismo que funciona, direcionado para as comunidades, com impacto direto na vida das famílias moçambicanas. Daí a necessidade de países iguais com vulnerabilidades climáticas como a de Moçambique.
In Mozambique, communities are identifying what they need and driving action.
A comunidade é que sabe tudo o que eles precisam.
LoCAL actions are as varied as the communities where they are being implemented. No two projects are identical, just as no two villages are the same. So, in Niger, communities have identified activities to address water shortages, drought and changing rainfall patterns. In Benin, communities are engaged in irrigation improvements and investment in vegetable gardens. In Bangladesh, ponds are being excavated to serve the water needs of marginalised and landless communities. In the mountainous region of Bhutan, where climate change impacts vary from valley to valley, village to village, LoCAL actions include irrigation, landslide prevention, flood adaptation, and more. LoCAL empowers local governments in developing and least developed countries to take decisive action, benefiting millions of the world's most vulnerable people. LoCAL, financing locally led adaptation.
Excellent. So I hope you enjoyed that short film. And I'd now like to put it into context, introduce the speakers, and then we'll have a little bit more discussion at the end as well. So the context is, as you saw through the film, and we know through the IPCC reports, that the days when we could just worry about climate change as something in the future have gone. Climate change is actually something that is happening right now. It's something that is happening and has happened. It's our present. We're reminded of this every day. I don't know if you've noticed, probably not, but in my own country, the meteorological office has changed the definition of a heat wave. There used to be government resources every time there was a heat wave, and a heat wave was calculated as, I think it was 5 successive days of 27 degrees Celsius. And now the UK government has changed a heat wave to being 5 successive days of 28 degrees Celsius. Why? Because the summer is becoming one whole heat wave. And of course, the support that they provide to local governments, they cannot afford to do it for the whole summer long. So they've just increased the definition of heat wave by 1 degree Celsius. That shows practically how local governments are suffering, having to provide this extra support to people during heat waves, and how they would need support from wider climate resources, and how this is a present emergency. So you saw through the video the other fact, which is that the response to this climate change is different place by place. As the lady said in the video, local people know what needs to be done, but what needs to be done will be different 50 kilometers away, 100 kilometers away. Climate adaptation is inherently local. And in fact, all cities, all towns, all villages, all human settlements are built around adaptations to the current environment, and they will all have to move to adapt to the environment that is coming. So it's going to be a global transition to move to a new state of adapting to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than it is now on average. So with that, I'm going to introduce the speakers. We're going to hear first from Mohideen Khan, who is chairman of the Kontakata Union in the Sarankola Upazila in Bajahat, Bangladesh, and he will be speaking in Bangla through an interpreter. Then we will have Landing Sane, who is chairman of the Mansa Konko Area Council in the Gambia. Then we will have Feliciano Rosario Matavelli, who is from the Gaza Service of Economy and Finance in Mozambique. Then Batanek Cheng, who is from the National Council for Deconcentration and Decentralization Secretariat in Cambodia. And finally, from Sophie de Konik, who is the global manager of the local climate adaptive living facility. Now, we will then have a summary discussion. And I think what we need to focus on in the discussion is how we can finance sustainably into the long term this incremental cost of climate adaptation. As I've mentioned, it's an additional cost. Everybody will have to bear this cost. It'll be a cost that is most, it's an issue which is most effectively addressed at the local level. There needs to be a systematic flow of funding to the local level to meet this incremental cost of climate change. And that's what we'll be discussing during this meeting. So I'd like to turn the floor over first to the chairman of the Kontakata Union in the Sarankola Upazila from Bangladesh. And I hope the interpretation is ready. You can sign and listen in English or in Bangla. Over to you, Mohideen Khan, and thank you so much for joining this meeting. You may be on mute.
সম্মানিত উপস্থিতি, সুধী সকলকে আসসালামু আলাইকুম। আজ গবেষণা কনফারেন্সে 2022 এর এই বৃহত্তর আয়োজনে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের ফলে ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ ও ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত এলাকার জনপ্রতিনিধি হিসাবে আমাকে কথা বলার সুযোগ দেওয়ার জন্য আমি আয়োজকদের আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ ও অভিনন্দন জানাচ্ছি। আমি মোহাম্মদ জাকির হোসেন খান মহিউদ্দিন, বাংলাদেশ বাগেরহাট জেলার শরণখোলা উপজেলা খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়ন পরিষদ চেয়ারম্যান। ইউনিয়ন হলো বাংলাদেশের গ্রামীণ এবং স্থানীয় সরকারের ক্ষুদ্র ইউনিট। খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়ন বাংলাদেশের বঙ্গোপসাগরের উপকূলবর্তী এলাকায় অবস্থিত এবং সুন্দরবন ম্যানগ্রোভ বন হতে এর দূরত্ব 7 থেকে 8 কিলোমিটার। ভৌগোলিক অবস্থানের কারণে খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়নটি বাংলাদেশের একটি অত্যন্ত জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনে ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ ও একটি একই সাথে পরিবেশগত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ এলাকা। এই ইউনিয়নের আয়তন প্রায় 16 বর্গ কিলোমিটার এবং এখানে জনসংখ্যা প্রায় 40,000-এরও বেশি। এই ইউনিয়নের অর্থনৈতিক কর্মকাণ্ডের মধ্যে কৃষি ও মৎস্য আহরণ অন্যতম। এছাড়াও এলাকার প্রায় 7 থেকে 8% মানুষ তাদের জীবিকার জন্য সুন্দরবনের উপকূল ও প্রত্যক্ষ পরোক্ষভাবে নির্ভরশীল। উপকূলীয় অঞ্চলে অবস্থিত হওয়ায় খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়নটি প্রায় ঘূর্ণিঝড়, জলোচ্ছ্বাস, স্বাভাবিকের চেয়েও উচ্চ জোয়ার ইত্যাদি দ্বারা ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়। এছাড়াও
আসসালামু আলাইকুম জাকির ভাই, আমি রিদা বলছি ইক্যাড থেকে। আমাদের একজন ট্রান্সলেটর আছে যিনি হচ্ছেন, আপনি যে বাংলায় বলছেন উনি এটা ট্রান্সলেট করে ইংলিশে বলে দিবে আর কি। আপনি যদি কথা বলার মাঝখানে একটু 1-2 সেকেন্ড একটা পজ দিতেন বা একটু থামতেন তাহলে উনি ট্রান্সলেট করে দিত।
ধন্যবাদ।
ধন্যবাদ ভাই। I would like to introduce everybody to Mr. Waliul, who will be our interpreter for today. He will be translating everything from Bangla to English for your benefit.
আবার স্টার্টিং হইতে বলবো?
It's working. Please go ahead. The translation is working fine. Please go ahead. Please continue.
We have a live interpreter as well, so he will be interpreting it to English as well.
মহিউদ্দিন ভাই, আপনি চালাতে থাকেন, যেখানে বলতেছেন সেখান থেকে চালাতে থাকেন।
7 থেকে 8% মানুষ তাদের ও জীবিকার জন্য সুন্দরবনের উপর ও প্রত্যক্ষ পরোক্ষভাবে নির্ভরশীল। উপকূলীয় অঞ্চল অবস্থিত হওয়ায় খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়নটি প্রায় ঘূর্ণিঝড়, জলোচ্ছ্বাস, স্বাভাবিকের চেয়েও উচ্চ জোয়ারের ইত্যাদি দ্বারা ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়। এছাড়াও অনিয়মিত বৃষ্টি, আকর্ষণীয় বন্যা, জলাবদ্ধ ও তাপদাহ ইত্যাদির কারণে আমরা নানাভাবে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত শিকার হই। এ সকল জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনজনিত আপদের কারণে আমরা ইউনিয়নের গুরুত্বপূর্ণ অবকাঠামো ও মানুষের বসতি ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হচ্ছে। মাটি ও পানিতে লবণাক্ত বৃদ্ধির ফলে ইতিমধ্যে সুপেয় পানি দুষ্প্রাপ্যতা তৈরি হয়েছে। এর ফলে মানুষের নানা ধরনের স্বাস্থ্য সমস্যা দেখা দিয়েছে। ফসলীয় জমি উৎপাদন ক্ষমতা এবং ফসলের উৎপাদন হ্রাস পেয়েছে। কৃষিকাজ ব্যাহত হওয়ায় মানুষের উপার্জন কমে যাচ্ছে এবং খাদ্য ও পুষ্টি নিরাপত্তা ঝুঁকিগ্রস্ত হচ্ছে। আয়ের উৎস হিসাবে প্রাকৃতিক সম্পদের উপর মানুষের অত্যাধুনিক নির্ভরশীলতার কারণে মানুষ বেশি ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হচ্ছে। আবার অনেক ক্ষেত্রে মানুষ অন্যত্র স্থানান্তরিত হতে বাধ্য হচ্ছে। তাই নিজের স্থানে টিকে থাকতে হলে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের সাথে অভিযোজিত হওয়ার কোনো বিকল্প নেই বলে আমি মনে করি। UNCDF, UNDP, ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়ন ও সুইডিশ সরকার এর সহায়তায় বাংলাদেশ সরকারের স্থানীয় সরকার বিভাগ কর্তৃক বাস্তবায়নাধীন লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট ইনিশিয়েটিভ অন ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ প্রকল্প বা সংক্ষেপে লজিক প্রকল্পের সহযোগিতা স্থানীয় পর্যায়ে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের অভিযোজনের জন্য আমরা আমাদের খন্তাকাটা ইউনিয়নের জলবায়ু ঝুঁকি নিরূপণ করছি এবং ইউনিয়নের জন্য একটি 3 বছরের মেয়াদ ক্লাইমেট রিস্ক রিডাকশন অ্যাকশন প্ল্যান প্রস্তুত করেছি। আমরা স্থানীয় মানুষ, সরকারি ও বেসরকারি সংস্থা, স্থানীয় প্রতিনিধি ও স্থানীয় জনগণের অংশগ্রহণের জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন অভিযোজনমূলক কার্যক্রম শনাক্ত, পরিকল্পনা বাস্তবায়ন, পরিবেক্ষণ ও মূল্যায়ন করে থাকি। এসব কাজের ক্ষেত্রে নারী, পুরুষ, যুবক সহ পেশার মানুষের অংশগ্রহণ থাকে এবং কার্যক্রম পরিকল্পনায় তাদের বিভিন্ন ধরনের প্রয়োজনকে বিবেচনা করা হয়। লজিক প্রকল্প হতে প্রাপ্ত অর্থ ইউনিয়ন পরিষদের বার্ষিক বাজেট অন্তর্ভুক্ত হয় এবং ইউনিয়ন পরিষদের বার্ষিক কর্ম পরিকল্পনার অংশ হিসাবে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন অভিযোজনমূলক কার্যসমূহ বাস্তবায়ন করা হয়। লজিক প্রকল্পের সহায়তায় আমরা আমাদের ইউনিয়নের সুপেয় পানির অভাব দূরীকরণের রেইন ওয়াটার হারভেস্টিং সিস্টেম, পুকুরের পানি বিশোধন প্লান্ট, ভূগর্ভস্থল খাবার পানির উপর চাপ কমাতে ভূপৃষ্ঠের পানি যেমন খালের পানি ব্যবহার করে কৃষি জমি সেচ দেওয়া এবং সেচ কাজের ডিজেলের পরিবর্তে সৌরশক্তি ব্যবহার করা ইত্যাদি ধরনের কাজ গ্রহণ করেছি। এছাড়া লজিক প্রকল্পের সহায়তা আমরা ইউনিয়নের প্রায় 600 জন নারী অনেকগুলো গ্রুপে নানা ধরনের জলবায়ু সহনশীল জীবিকা কার্যক্রম গ্রহণ করেছে, যেমন লবণাক্ত সহনশীল কৃষি, ভেড়া পালন, তরমুজ চাষ, কাকটার চাষ, সরিষার চাষ, সূর্যমুখীর চাষ ইত্যাদি। এতে তাদের যথেষ্ট আর্থিক সামাজিক উন্নয়ন হয়েছে। জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন অভিযোজনমূলক কাজ বাস্তবায়ন করতে গিয়ে আমাদের অনেক নতুন কিছু শেখা হয়েছে। অনেক ধরনের সক্ষমতা বৃদ্ধি হয়েছে, যেমন কারিগরি, আর্থিক ব্যবস্থাপনা ইত্যাদির বিষয় সক্ষমতা। লজিক প্রকল্প বাস্তবায়নের মাধ্যমে আমরা যে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয়ে সচেতন হয়েছি তা হলো যে কোনো উন্নয়ন কাজ জলবায়ু জনিত ঝুঁকির বিষয় গুলোকে মাথায় রেখে পরিকল্পনা ও বাজেট করা। এর ফলে আমরা মনে করি যে আমাদের উন্নয়নকে আমরা জলবায়ু সহনশীল করতে সক্ষম হব। তবে স্থানীয় পর্যায়ে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনে অভিযোজনের মূল ধারা হলো আর্থিক সীমাবদ্ধতা, কারিগরি ও বৈজ্ঞানিক জ্ঞান অভাব এবং বিভিন্ন সরকারি সংস্থা পরিকল্পনা ও কাজের উপর আমাদের জলবায়ু সহনশীলতা নির্ভরশীলতা। এই বলে আমি আমার বক্তব্য শেষ করছি। আপনাদের সকলকে ধন্যবাদ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you so much indeed for that. Very, very inspiring, but also insightful presentation. And thank you so much to the translators. I think it's clear from that presentation that the solution to climate adaptation is many, many, many small to medium-sized activities. This is not a problem that's going to be fixed by one big investment. It's a problem which is going to be fixed by many, many, many multiple small to medium-sized initiatives, as we have seen. And they can only be designed and implemented locally, but they need to be at a global scale. It's going to be about adapting locally, reporting globally. With that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor to Landing Sane, the chairman of the Mansa-Konko Area Council in the Gambia, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and maybe for the people participating in this workshop, connecting it with what you've just heard from Bangladesh, because we're now going to travel a few thousand kilometers to the west, and we're going to hear about a different ecosystem, but one that is facing the same challenge. So over to you, Landing Sane.
Thank you very much, David. Let me thank my co-presenter or panelist, chairman, for his wonderful presentations. Like he said, I am Landing Bisane, and I am the chairman, Mansa-Konko Area Council. I also double as the president of the Gambia Association of Local Government Authorities. Are you hearing me clearly?
Loud and clear. Please continue.
Thank you. So I will, just like my colleague, will be presenting on the local experience in the Gambia. My presentation, I will give you some overview of the climate change impact. I will also give you some actions that are being taken and some of the positive impact also realized. Yes, as you can see in the slide, the background or the overview will give you that this is a project-led initiative which has a duration of 4 years, and it started in 2018. It will be finishing very soon this year. The budget allocation for the project is 15.2 million for the local, and the sectors is multi-sectoral. The donor is the European Union, and the implementing partner is the UNCDF, that's the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and the International Trade Center in the Gambia. Of course, part of the ministries involved is the Ministry of Lands and Regional Government and the Ministry of Finance. These ministries are involved at different levels for the job aspect of the project, because the project has 3 different components. You have job, skills, and finance. So the job aspect of it is under the Ministry of Lands and Regional Government and Ministry of Finance. The skills aspect of it is handled by the Ministry of Higher Education, Research, Science, and Technology. And the component that handles finance is basically handled by the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of the Gambia, CBG. Now, this project is being implemented in the local government authorities of the Gambia. Gambia has 8 local government areas. We call them LGAs. And these LGAs are not all part of the project for this cycle. Only few are piloted and benefiting from this, of which my own area is part of. It started with, in 2018, and a part of also the areas that are piloted. Not the entire area is piloted, but certain wards. In the Gambia, you have the local government area, you have the wards, and you have the village development committees. So in my area, like for example, out of 12 wards, only 4 wards were targeted for the beginning. But as we speak, altogether across the country, we have 32 wards benefiting from the project. What I would want to emphasize on looking at climate change is how it affects, and I want to read this script for you. Adaptation to climate change is a necessity for all communities everywhere. Populations in developing and least developed countries are among those most affected by climate change. Of course, that is very evident. The least developed countries, even though might not be the major contributor to climate change, are the most affected when it comes to climate change. And the LoCAL, of course, which is the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, is a proven and effective mechanism realizing climate change adaptation at the community level, focusing on the needs of the most vulnerable countries and least developed countries. I think that is very clear. In my own case for the Gambia, as you can see, the LoCAL is definitely one mechanism and that we live to celebrate, bearing in mind that the approach and also the mechanism, the way the mechanism operates is very friendly, particularly when it comes to work of the local government authorities as primary duty bearer to the people to provide services for the needs of the people. The LoCAL has come to make our work easier rather, because if you look at the various interventions, for example, in this picture, you can see very clearly, very few big trees. The place is semi-arid, highly, exposed. The soil is highly exposed, and this in our country has contributed to very erratic rainfalls as compared to about 30 years ago. And that has definitely impacted on the production, productivity and production of agriculture. It will be interesting you to know that agriculture is the main employer of my country. And if we are experiencing something like this as it is in the picture, of course, it is going to grossly affect the production or productivity of our country's agricultural sector, and that will in turn affect the food security need of our country. It will also expose our environment to various forms of probably problems or situations that may impact on the lives of the people. Now, this, as you can see in the picture, is one of the project interventions that the LoCAL is into. Cultivation by men and women in their areas, and this keep the soil rich, of course, but also it enhance productivity. It also provide job for the women and youth, as you can see in the different photos. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a classical example of engagement and adaptive way of women and youth in how they utilize LoCAL to provide job facilities for them in horticultural gardens. But not only job, it gives them opportunity to access water, which is very scarce. You can see in some communities, it's like it will take you, 30 to 35 meters or even beyond to reach to the water level, and in that, if we have to depend on these local wells, it is very difficult for our women folks, because then the labor is very intensive and it eats up a lot of their time when it comes to accessing water. But then the LoCAL is providing good water facilities for them to consume clean, drinkable water, but again, in turn, provide opportunity for them to water their horticultural gardens and some of their agricultural facilities either at their backyard gardens or at community gardens. So this is a very good intervention. Next slide, please. This is an access road, and it's a culvert. I'm sure when we go down, you will see it completely done. You see women, youth, and local contractors being engaged by LoCAL. There are a lot of things involved in this activity. The contractors will transfer skills to the local communities. You can see it. You can see women actively involved in labor, and there they will earn what we call they cash for work, and they will earn some income out of it. But again, they will also learn skills on construction and other vital relevant skills that are being taught around it. But this will provide access for different communities that are applying this route. And normally, with regards to LoCAL in this kind of intervention, it is not only targeting one community, but it is targeting many communities. As you can see, this access route, when it is completed, it is a major, connecting route of a feeder village, feeder road for many villages in the locality. Next slide, please. Okay, that is it here. It is almost near completion. As you can see, during the rains in the Gambia, we witness or experience rains most of the times because of these climate changes. And those torrential rains, when they happen, as you can see this stream kind of thing, it washes away. And once it washes away, you can see transportation along this route is kind of almost halted. People cannot reach each other, especially through vehicles, motor vehicles, or through other means. You either have to, travel, by, your own self. That is, you travel on foot, but the place is not accessible, with vehicles. So, but this intervention is now going to create a motorable way for people to reach each other. And this area in particular, where you have this culvert, has a very, prominent market facility that here in the Gambia we call Lumo. Lumo means it's a weekly market for the area. Normally, it is very, very, well attended by people even across the border into Senegal. Neighboring village come over to that place, and this is one of the routes they will use. So this route now is connecting those places. Next slide, please. Okay, now it is completed, and this is a different one from the other one. They are all completed, and we were opening them. This was an opening ceremony. Next slide, please. Yes, okay. Just like I was saying, this is the other one and that other one. So this one you are seeing is a storage facility for women in their horticultural garden. As you can see, those who are working here on cash for work, apart from the specialized contractor, the others are people from the community. And alongside, they are taught on skills. That is why you have job skills and finance. And systematically, they learn on the skills so that even after this project, they can practice the skill and get income. I want to comment at this point about one very interesting and important component, which is finance. During this process, cash is not normally handled, directly by the project. Normally, it's transferred through money transfer means. And along the process, the communities are also exposed to electronic banking and electronic transaction with cash. So that also serves as a capacity building process to enable the community people to be exposed to those latest and current electronic ways of managing finance. Yes, so you can see this also facility is very important because then women will be able to cultivate, and then when they get their produce, they can keep them safely in these facilities. Next slide, please. So this is also an agricultural farm. It's a mixed farm. You can see this guy standing is a councillor of the ward. And you can see mango trees, of course, but this on the other side is pawpaw and different vegetables being cultivated there. But on the other side, you can see is groundnut, which is the cash crop for Gambia. So the women and the youth involved in that communally to cultivate. Next slide. Okay, so you see in the abundance of water, the food is tasty. You can see water is available and the young lady is watering. So the drudgery, the hard work is elevated. The women no more are not exposed to that, hard work, fetching water from well, taking a lot of their time. And, you can see them happy together. So that is very interesting. And in the process, they also get income out of it. So poverty is alleviated. And they become more and more resilient to the effect and impact of climate change. Next slide, please. So that is the end of it. With what I've said so far, to wrap it up all together, if you look at what I've presented, apart from the overview, there are a lot of benefits that we derive from this, that the LoCAL, because in the process, the local government authorities are integrated. We are consulted and are integrated into the whole process. So along the way, not only the community will benefit, but the local government authority in itself, the capacity will be built in the process in terms of adapting to climate change, but also in terms of understanding the needs of our people. Because all these interventions come out of the assessment of what our people want, and they will tell us what they want, and they will participate in doing what they want to get what is desirable or what is needed for them. So on that note, I thank you very much. I'm sorry if I have gone past my time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And maybe a couple of minutes, but that's okay, because I think the passion and the relevance of these actions that are taking place at the local level are so important. And you can see the similarities and the differences between Bangladesh and Gambia. Similarities, local action, differences, unique responses, depending on what the situation is. So thank you so much indeed. One element we'll come to in the wrap up is at the end is you showed a budget at the beginning. So how to make that beyond a project budget, how to make that something that happens on into the future. And that's what I'd like to come to at the end, and how to institutionalize, mainstream, make part of everyday action this kind of work. And I know that in the Gambia, you're working on a local climate fund, which would then be able to do this into the future. And we'll talk about that in the final parts. But now I'd like to give the floor over to Feliciano Rosario Matavelli, who is from the Provincial Service of Economy and Finance in Gaza province of Mozambique. So, Feliciano, espero que tudo esteja bem, e you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to hear that you can speak Portuguese. Actually, I'm working with few of your friends here, Mr. Castro, Namaka, and other guys around.
Oh, you have to think about how to compliment a Castro Namaka. Bastante tempo desde ouvir este nome. Yeah, espero que esteja bem. Obrigado. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, after those two rich presentation from my two colleagues there, I will try to make sure that I cope up at the same level as they did. Actually, I will talk about the climate impact in Mozambique. Please, next slide. Yes, I'll talk about climate impact in Mozambique. As you may know, the last 3 years, Mozambique has been affected by 3 powerful cyclones. In 2019 was 2 different powerful cyclones. One, Idai, which have affected the central region of Mozambique, And just after 1 month, a kenneth that affected in the northern side of Mozambique. And this in 2001, in 21, the other cyclone have as well affected Mozambique. As you can know, Mozambique, it's those last year are being victim of those very powerful cyclones that at the end affecting a lot of people, and the economy, and around 1.85 million people have been affected around the region. I'm talking about Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, being more than 600 people, that affected in Mozambique in terms of they were killed in Mozambique during those 3 years. This year, right in the beginning of the year, we were affected again by the tropical storm called Anna, that have been impacted about 185,429 people, and they have injured more than 200 people and killed more than 38 people, and affected more than 37,796 families. And from those family, about 2,200, they have been displaced to Malawi, which was nearest safe place. So they moved to Malawi to get a safe place. In February this year, still, we have another tropical depression called the Dumako that have been, that affected more than 23,783 people, and we have about 14 casualties. And just after 1 month or less than 1 month, another one, which was the last one that happened 2 weeks back, called Gombe, that impacted more than 448,000 people. So as you can know, we are in the road of cyclones and the tropical depression and so on. One thing that I would like to share is that the last cyclone that happened in 2 weeks back, called Gombe, they've affected as well one of the regions where UNCDF with the local initiative who works, called Merci, in the north side of Mozambique, Musuria, where we have been tested in terms of our capacity of adapting and bring to the community, some infrastructure that can be resistant and resilient to the climate change. And happily to say that the classrooms that we have built, they have resisted to that cyclones, out of a lot of other infrastructure that has been destroyed. So that shows the importance of adaptation, importance of trying to bring knowledge to the local people towards sustainability. Next slide, please. We can see in the dark red or a brown area, those are the districts that are more normally have severely affected, and the light brown, it's medium affected. So we can see mainly the central and the central north area of Mozambique are in the road of cyclones and the tropical depression. And those are the areas that this year they have been affected. Next slide. So how do we deal with it as a local government? How do we deal with those cyclones, with those tropical depression, or all those disaster risk? So we try to bring about the disaster risk management before before happening. If you can see, just taking into, rephrasing Mr. Jackson, he said, okay, we have to increase all our plans, taking into account 1 degree plus in the global. Yes, in the last 50 years was increase of temperature, but one degree centigrade. and that have among that as well have increased the frequency and intensity of extreme event, particularly in Mozambique. Some years back, we normally used to say, okay, the extreme events like cyclones happen every 20 years, but today it's like every year and sometimes twice or 3 times a year. And in terms of its magnitude, it's getting more and more severe. And that leads us to take some measure to make sure that we deal with it. So what we do before that happens, we have to identify the more, let me say, the places where normal that happen, like floods, like cyclone. Then we have to do the simulation of, the simulation of exercise that to make sure that we take the people out. So we have to train the people. We have the local committee of disaster, reduction in place. So we have to train them. So we do the simulation exercise. We disclose the emergency plan. We revitalize these local committees and as well the Mozambique Red Cross volunteers. We activate all local committee and identify the high risk areas. And then we identify evacuation routes and safe places for temporary shelters. That is preparedness before the cyclone happens. During the cyclones, we operationalize the contingency plan. We have to we do the rapid need assessment and readjust the response plan according to the magnitude of the event. We prepare humanitarian aids and call for mobilizing additional resources and as well coordinate rapid assessment for post-disaster needs. And after the disaster, we normally implement the specific activity for the recovery livelihoods. We monitor and integrate the implementation of the recovery activities. We assess humanitarian response activity and lesson learned, as well as developing the multi-sectorial post-emergency recovery. Next slide. So, why local matter to the local to the local place? I will just, if you see the picture there, it's one of the example of a small water system that was developed through our assistance that provide water, to the local villages. So the local government in Mozambique is in unique position to promote the climate change adaptation actions. Build resilience to the community, and actually because the people are living in the community, with the community. If it's something happening as well, they are affected, so they know better what really needs to be done. They are in the front line, so to identify and implement response that best meet the local need, and they can bring together various actors and as well to get a good results. Normally, the local government, they've been undertaken for small and medium-sized adaptation infrastructures and investment and require for building climate resilience. But the climate funding and the capacity gap, to make sure that we get all the data, disaster risk reduction and recovery. These are the main. We get that mainly from the local level, who they know better what's happening and they can provide more, useful information. On top of that, the COVID-19 have as well exacerbated the impact from the climate shocks affecting highly vulnerable people. As you may know, most of people who were living out of the informal businesses, and they were forced, to leave this informal business because of, avoiding the agglomeration and so on. They end up, getting more poor and poor, and that have created even more problem in terms of poverty. The next slide. LoCAL as a financing mechanism to strengthening subnational climate change adaptation in Mozambique. So this is a proven global mechanism designed by UNCDF. So that they brought to us, a form of support to the local government to assess effectively use climate finance and local level, ensuring traceability and performance. As well, promoting the integration of climate change adaptation in local government. So developing and adapting plan and budget. As you can know, the traditional planning was a top-down process where we have the national plan, and then the district should extract from the national plan what to do in terms of development, socioeconomic development. But through this process, we can identify locally what suits better to the community and bring those identified infrastructure or activity, and then we pull into the local plan, and again goes up to the provincial, up to the national. So we've used this form of planning, to change the way how traditional used to be done. So we as well using that to get access to the performance-based climate related grants, and that guarantee programming and verification of local adaptation expenditure, combining performance-based climate resilient grant with technical and capacity building support. One of the things that, beside the financing infrastructures, the process of implementation bring about capacity building to the district, training the government, the district government, the district technical team, and as well the district consultative council. Next slide. So how do we access to that? In Mozambique, we have so-called local adaptation plans, which is a strategy to provide action to reduce climate vulnerability and improve resilience to livelihood. At almost all the districts, they do have those plans. So those plans are designed, they bring about all the district profile, the socioeconomic and climate vulnerability, the district development vision, the strategy, the objective of climate change, the resilience, the action plan. They bring as well the monitoring and evaluation plan, the investment opportunity to drive resilient district development. So it's a strategic document that to bring all the needs to respond to the events that normally happen to that district and can be affected. And it's picking, what intervention can be put in place to make sure that we adapt and we can assist the district to be more resilient to those impacts. We draw up the local adaptation plan. I mean, the process of drawing up the local adaptation plan involves the government of the district, the community, all people in the community use, women, civil society, and the leaders. So we form different groups. There's a process of consultation to build this strategic plan for the district should be. It's out of a participation process. So we as well trying to bring the vulnerability matrix, where we try to identify the vulnerability and responsiveness capacity of the district to those vulnerabilities. So the local local project provide the technical assistance, the capacity building, the financial support in local adaptation plan implementation. As you may know, there's a lot of districts having those plans, but hardly they do have access to the funds for its implementation. Out of 154 districts, there are already we have 125 districts with the local adaptation plan. And the local project is present in Mozambique in 29 districts plus one municipality. Being those, Gaza, as you know, Gaza was a first province that was benefited from the local initiative since 2014. So we've been active, so LoCAL has been active in Gaza since then. Today covering about 11 districts, and they've scaled up to Inyambane with 10 districts, Nampula, Zambezia, and Niassa. So the local adaptation plan in all those districts are in place, which are being updated, to make sure that they have a period of its implementation up to 10 years as a strategic period. And for Niassa province particularly is supporting the Lishinga district, which has no local adaptation plan, but now it's been supported to design its local adaptation plan. Next.
Thank you, Feliciano. I'm going to ask you if you could go back to the previous slide and maybe just stop there for the time. But I'm going to use this slide, which is a very important slide, to move to the next presentation. And just before doing so, to highlight one point, I think, Feliciano, that was a very strong and powerful presentation. You've highlighted something which didn't come up in the other two, which is the issue of the disasters. So there's two elements to climate change. Of course, there is the slow rise in global temperatures and the impact that has on rain patterns and agriculture, etc. And then there is also the sudden, the not so much slow, but the sudden disasters, such as the hurricanes, which are affecting Mozambique with increasing regularity. So climate change adaptation requires both response to disasters and a response to the creeping changes. But if you could go back to the slide that you were just showing, the one that we just looked at before you stopped speaking. So here you see the challenge, and this is what Sophie's going to address, and then we're going to discuss in the discussion. And then I hope we have time to come back to the speakers. So as you can see from Feliciano's slide there, we have local adaptation plans there's 154 districts in Mozambique, and there are 125 local adaptation plans. But the LoCAL mechanism, which is a mechanism, not a project, it's a mechanism, only covers a fraction of those 125. And likewise, it does not yet have a 10-year financing window. So the challenge that we face, and what we're going to discuss with Sophie now and then in the follow-up, is how we can turn this mechanism into a long-term financing system to enable what we've heard from Gambia, Bangladesh, and Mozambique, all very unique, but to enable this incremental cost to be mentioned, to be taken into the future. So please think about that. I'm going to give the floor to Vatanek Cheng from NCDD in Cambodia to speak on how Cambodia sees this challenge. And I know that in Cambodia, you've already started to look at ways in which you can take this to scale. So looking forward to hearing from you on that. Over to you, Vatanek, and thank you so much, Feliciano.
Thank you, David. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. If I may, Sarah, can you help me to just share the slides for me? Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to UNCDF for hosting this event. It's a great honor for me on behalf of my organization, NCDDS, to be presenting some of the highlights in terms of climate change impacts in Cambodia, as well as some of the strategies and experience that we had in moving forward with the implementation, as well as looking at ways to help to finance the LoCAL mechanism forward. So I know that all my partners, countries of LoCAL that presented earlier has shared some very insightful in terms of their experience with their climate change impact, as well as some of the LoCAL mechanism and also project that they've been working on. It's quite very insightful and very knowledgeable experience that we can also discuss and share with our local government as well. So my presentation will quickly just go through some of the challenges that we have. Next slide, please, Sarah. So similarly to some of our partners in Southeast Asia, Cambodia is a very agrarian cultures, so very based in terms of farming and livestock raisings. Definitely climate change has a detrimental impact for Cambodia, particularly in causing higher temperatures and variability in our precipitations. So this would mean that we have a very frequencies and then intensity in flood, drought, and extreme weather. And there was a study back in 2018 by the Ministry of Economic and Finance that the climate change will impact our GDP by 2.5% in 2030. So this is quite a large figures. And here is a recent study that the Notre Dame Gain Index has projected that Cambodia is now ranked 36 as a vulnerable countries. And then in terms of readiness capacity, we are ranked 29. And then just share some other highlight as well. With the Global Climate Index risk, we are now currently ranking the 14th country prone to climate risk in 2019. And then some of the commitment that the Cambodian is looking at is our engagement with the Paris Agreement is to submit the National Determined Contribution, which was recently submitted in 2020. And that is our commitment to reduce our GHG emission by 2030 by 41.7%. So this is quite a large ambition. So this is encompassed not only adaptation, but also other climate change activity as well. And right now, if you look at Cambodia, we, as a whole, we've been working with a lot of development bank as well as UN partner to help to tackle these issues. So our organizations has been working very closely with the Ministry of Environment to look at strategies and also plans. Some of the most important thing is scientific data and also looking at projection as well. So the World Bank recently has developed the RCP projections for the mean temperatures for Cambodia for the next few decades. And this is a very important figures which is globally used and standardized, and it allows us to look at what type of impact we will see. RCP 4.5 is a very relative moderate figure projection that we can we use, and then it also shows that the effects in part of the region as well, especially the southwest and northeast of Cambodia. So a lot of the provinces that border in Vietnam, we see that this will experience in much more effects, especially in the dry seasons. And then those areas are typically agricultural based as well. And then some of the other region in the LASAP areas are also affected when we look at this scenario, especially those are farmers and fishermen in those areas, and particularly vulnerable group, especially a lot of the fishermen community are women-based in particulars. Next slide, please, Sarah. Here is some of the recent overall compositions of our vulnerable index, which is an index that was developed by UNDPs with the Ministry of Environment. Here we can look at which local government that are really affected by the climate change impacts, and then they are segregated in 3 different variables: the highly one, quite one, and less one. And then we can target a certain area depending on the vulnerability of community, and then work with those local government. So in the 2019 index here, you can see that at least 270 commune, which is roughly about 16.5% of the Cambodian community, are categorized as highly vulnerable. And then about 423 commune, which is about 26% of the entire commune, are categorized as quite vulnerable. So the ambitions of our agency as well as the government itself is to tackle the local government and addressing these issues. And then some of the programs that we've been working with in the last decades has been quite strategic, as well as mobilizing finances into the local government to address those. And then some of the main strong mechanism that we've been engaged with is the LoCAL project with the UNCDF. So next slide, please, Sarah. Oh, I'm sorry. Back to earlier slide, Sarah. Sorry. So here, with the LoCAL mechanism, initially we worked with UNCDF in 2011 as the first pioneer countries to adapt the mechanism. And then there, the challenge back then is that we have a local planning process at the local level. What we call is a 3-year strategic investment planning, as well as a 5-year development plan. And then in ways of LoCAL is how do we integrate this mechanism and then achieve the result at the end. So it started as a phase implementations in pilot stages. As you can see, one of these pilots has been conducted. There's assessments to be done. And then, of course, performance evaluation as well as part of the mechanism. And we have also engaged with other stakeholders as well. So UNDP as well as IFAD is some of the other development partner that we work with to help co-financing some other infrastructure project as well. So in a way, during the pilot phases implementations, we're able to learn better about our local implementations, strong engagement with our local community, as well as understanding more about what works and what doesn't work. And then also make modifications to our current policy as well. And then looking at longer-term projections, similarly to what other countries have been presented, is the long-term way. How do we attract and promote the mechanism and attract more financings to these local government? So there's been discussions at the national level and also local level, as well as international level, how to do this. Some of the key attraction that we have is looking at the global climate funds, similarly the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Funds. Sarah, can you please go to the next 2 slides, please? Next one. Yes, thank you. So this is something that Cambodia is currently is at the moment. I believe other countries will soon as well be engaging the Green Climate Fund as well to help mobilize these resources. So our engagement started out quite a couple years back, and we work very closely with our Ministry of Environment, which is the national designated agency for Cambodia. And with the support from our development partners, you can see here on the right-hand side, definitely we have a strong partners to help with these discussions. And then, of course, it's a lengthy process, but it's not impossible. It's very possible. There's a lot of audits, there's a lot of assessment, a lot of conversation back and forth. But the Green Climate Fund is quite very process-oriented and then have very dedicated to help national country to be accredited as well. So that's the first step, is to go through the accreditations. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then once you are through your accreditations, it could take a couple steps to go through accreditations. And then in parallel to your accreditation, you should already be looking at your strategic planning as well. So there's a two pathway that for Cambodia, especially for our agency as the national accredited agency, is looking at programming development. The NDC process, as I mentioned earlier, is the strategic initiative paper that we initiated. Of course, the country programming, which is quite important. The NDA is the one who is the ownership and also steers these conversations. And then, of course, developing engagement at more of a planning process, and then looking at pockets of type of mechanism, and then what are potentials in terms of realigning and looking at different matrices in terms of the projects that's available. And then going more and more strategically, and then at more local level, is looking at our own entity work program. And that's where we start to develop brainstorming concept ideas, and also looking at prioritizations in terms of projects, which is cross sectors and multi sectors type conversations. And at the same time, with the support with the GCF, you also once you have your accreditations, you want to start looking at the type of resources available. The GCF have a number of mechanisms in terms of financing support as well. So if countries feel that they are not capable or they lack resources in terms of support, they have the readiness support as well. So readiness is available for countries to help to build their capacity in terms of hiring consultant, also working at with different development partners to help mobilize resources to help build themselves so that they are able to access those finances as well. And then last but not least, here we are now at a stage where we are scaling up our local mechanism projects with UNCDF. So currently we have now it's in phase 3 of our LoCAL projects for Cambodia. We have submitted our proposals to scale up to 15 districts, and this is quite ambitious for Cambodia. And this submission has already been reviewed by the GCF. Currently last week, we just got our approval from the CIC from the GCF. And so now we are looking to mobilize other support. So the GCF also have what we call is the preparations, project preparation support facilities. And this is some other assistance that the GCF could provide to help to build a full robust project proposal as well. So this is where we are at now. We're working closely with our UNCDF partners to go and to finalize the project as well. And hopefully at the same time, we also will be working with other pipeline projects with other partners as well in order to engage both the Green Climate Fund as well as the adaptation funds. So this is kind of conclude of my presentations. It kind of give you a little bit of ideas about where your country and other partner in terms of their LoCAL implementations, looking forward to help to mobilize other resources as well. And then I would really encourage having earlier conversations with the GCF. And then if you don't have that connections, definitely engage with us or engage with your NCDF partners to have that discussion, so that because there's going to be a needed time to help prepare those documentations and also just collecting data and reports so that it's available when you're ready to do your accreditations as well. All right, thank you so much for the opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Vatanek, for taking us up on that challenge to explore how Mozambique, for example, could move to coverage for all the districts through the route that you have followed in terms of approaching the Green Climate Fund to take this mechanism to scale. There are, of course, other options. In Gambia, they're looking at a national climate fund, of which itself could be capitalized by Green Climate Fund and all other bodies. There are also other ways of organizing climate finance. I know in Bangladesh, there is an existing climate fund. However, maybe that institution has not yet realized that the local level is actually the way to achieve greater results. And if you actually turn your mind to how you can take to scale these local mechanisms, that's one way forward. There are other ways too, which I'm going to come to in a moment. But before that, I'm going to give this challenge to Sophie. Sophie, as the manager of this facility on behalf of the member states who really own and control it, what do you see as the challenges to taking this to scale? And can you think of any longer term solutions that we could start to advocate for that will enable this type of mechanism to be operational globally? Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, David. Before I start, the only thing I would like to share with the audience is the common denominator amongst what we've heard, and it's come through some presentation. But in every case that we've heard, the country and the local government use performance-based climate resilience grants, which is a way to ensure the programming and verification of climate change expenditures at the local level. So that's one really key denominator, because the question you asked, David, is how do we bring this to scale? We've heard 4 cases, but in Bangladesh, for example, we're working now with 72 union parishes, and there are thousands of them. So how do we bring the mechanism to scale. In the case of the Gambia, we work with 32 wards and there are over 100. Same in Mozambique, 29 out of 154, and the same in Cambodia. So in order to go to scale, and plus also we have those 4 countries we mentioned, but since we started 10 years ago, there are now 30 countries that are using this instrument. And more actually asking to set it up because they see it as a different way of channeling climate finance. So in order to help countries go to scale, one avenue I think is for countries to come together. So the countries, like you said, own the mechanism. So they set themselves the strategic priorities in how it is to be managed and brought next to the international climate community. They will meet in about 5 weeks in Brussels at the annual board meeting. And since last year, a group of ministers also started convening annually to define a joint political ambition around local climate adaptation and leveraging to that end their experience, their collective experience with LoCAL. So that's one way. It's for the countries to come together. Of course, the communities to come together, the local governments to come together, and then the central government. So that's somehow these collective needs are elevated jointly. Now, on the questions to access climate finance, there is, as we see, a federation of efforts. So countries that gradually go to scale, like we've seen in Mozambique or Cambodia or other countries, actually start seeing different partners using the same instrument. They might well be each with a project approach because that's largely how aid function or climate finance function, however, using the same instrument. So in the case of Mozambique, there are already 4 or 5 such partners, and 2 at least in Bangladesh, as well as 4 in Cambodia. So among those partners, we can mention some of them which have the vision to actually see this instrument being board and piloted and then scaled up. So EU, Sweden, Belgium, Switzerland, African Development Bank, and there are more, as well as the participating countries, because we also see that the countries co-finance LoCAL themselves in a number of cases. So altogether, they've already mobilized $125 million US, and we committed together, or UNCDF as the host of the facility, to double the original figure of 100 million every 5 years at least until 2023. So that's one way to go to scale. A second way to go to scale is to continue supporting the countries with their direct access. So we're currently working with Cambodia, but with another dozen countries to help them with direct access to Adaptation Fund and Green Climate Fund. And that means supporting their own accreditation and then accompanying them at every step from concept note to funding proposal to accessing the fund so that they can themselves access and then channel that finance down to the local level, to the local government, to the communities. Now, that wouldn't be enough because we know that the accreditation level standards of countries are often limited, at least to start, to 10 million, sometimes 15 million in terms of envelope to adaptation funds. So in order to reach scale in those countries, more will be needed. So another effort is about working with partners, bilateral, multilateral, be it banks or more traditional donors, to understand the standard of performance-based climate resilience grant. And so a number of countries have come together and actually working in preparing international standard, ISO standard, which is still in the process, but well advanced, so that the international community understand at least this, understand well the performance-based climate resilience grants as a new instrument for climate finance. And last, maybe as a 4th point, we see that the countries are coming together to actually share their experience, their direct practitioners' experience at the UNFCCC through side events, yes, but also through the negotiations, making submissions, sharing their experience with the Adaptation Committee, with the Standing Committee on Finance, and more, so that with the view that gradually that experience, which enables country to move from project approaches to more systemic, scalable approach, yet flexible, contextualized, but this kind of movement from project approach to using their own system starts being understood by the convention and by the financial instruments of the convention. So we have the COP27 in a few months ahead. Countries are working together in that direction, and we hope that, because there will be a report from the Gobeshona conference, we hope that that kind of messaging about, of course, underscoring the importance of local lead adaptation, but also of federating efforts of partners, of banks, of municipality financial mechanisms into systemic scalable approach, going beyond project approach, is a message that can also be passed from this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sophie. So I think you put your finger on it in terms of going beyond the project approach. And also you mentioned that lowest common denominator, and maybe we can come back to that and we can see how important that is. So you mentioned the performance-based climate resilient grants. So this is at the core of the LoCAL mechanism, and it is a grant, but it comes down to the local government through the existing system. In Bangladesh, through the system that goes to the upazilas and the union parishads. In Mozambique, the system that goes to the districts from the province and from the national. So it uses the existing budget system, the existing procurement system, the existing planning, the existing financing. And that's why it's so effective. Because if it was a project, you would need to have all the project managers, the vehicles, the staff, and then when the project comes to an end, they all run away. But because it's a system, it just comes down through the existing arrangements and provides that additional cost to climate adaptation. But the other important point about the performance-based climate resilient grant is it's performance-based, because without that element, one could argue it would be wasted. How do you know it's going for real adaptation? And you know it because of the performance-based element, and the central government controls that. And the Ministry of Environment, the regulatory bodies, of course, the Audit Commission can make sure the money is well spent and spent on climate adaptation according to the local assessments. So you have that built-in checks and balances. Now, I think you made a really good point, Sophia. One way one can take this to scale is through the Green Climate Fund, but that takes a long time. And even the Green Climate Fund funds things on a project-by-project basis. So they can fund this on a project basis for 3 years, but then you're still stuck after that 3 years, once you finally get the money out of the Green Climate Fund. So I think, and speaking as the chair of the LoCAL board, the co-chair with all the countries, we're going to be looking at the UNFCCC at the COP to see how we can use this ISO standard that LoCAL will be seeking to get this really mainstreamed and try to find other ways that it can be a sustainable long-term form of finance. Maybe there needs to be some kind of international tax. If there was an international tax on fuel that then applied to this kind of mechanism that's applying the ISO standard, that would be a way of actually having resources to keep this mechanism going into the future. And we need to think outside the box and think beyond, I think, the World Bank, the Green Climate Fund and others, because as you mentioned, 125 million, that's impressive. But if you look at the scale of the world, we need so much more. So the ISO, I think, is an important first step to get this standard adopted, and then how we can, at the COP, get this standard mainstreamed. So we have, this is what we were going to discuss in the discussion, but this discussion is now going to be compressed into 3 minutes because we had such great presentations, but I wanted people to hear the richness of the presentations and to think it's going to be mechanism, not a project, and it's going to be some kind of sustainable mechanism through the intergovernmental fiscal transfer system. And, it's going to have to find some form of sustainable financing. But this is what needs to be done. This is the only way to build a sustainable future. People might say it's grant financed. Why isn't it a bankable project? You're not going to get this type of adaptation in a bankable way. But by doing this, you're building the future for the economy. So this is actually investing in that economy. So let's look at ways in which we can finance this into the long term. So it's actually the end of the period designated for this event. I'm really sorry, it's not going to be possible to open it up to the floor, but I think the food for thought is there. Please follow us, find out more about LoCAL, and you will see in other events are organized by LoCAL, we're going to start looking at how we can mainstream and secure into the future this type of locally led adaptation financing mechanism, which I think is part of our shared future. So thank you so much, Feliciano, Vatacek. Thank you so much, the colleagues from Bangladesh, and all of the participants. Really grateful to you for participating in this event, and looking forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.